Now, when it comes to car manufacturers, I have to admit, I know almost nothing about Saab. I'm sure this is gonna sound very naive, but when I think of Saab, I think of uninteresting cars. I know that they are famous for their turbos, but as far as I'm aware, they don't make any exciting sports cars, just normal everyday cars that happen to have turbos. Which, now that I think about it, is kind of cool, I guess. Well, it turns out I'm not the only one who's unfamiliar with Saab, because upon researching for this video, I found out that they actually went out of business in 2012. Rest in peace, Saab. This prejudice I had about the company is the exact reason why when I saw this car arrive in our garage, I was completely shocked when it had the Saab badge on it. We own a lot of cars, and I have to come out and admit, this is probably in the top tier of coolest looking ones. And it's a Saab? So I quickly learned about one of Saab's only exotic looking sports cars, this 1974 Saab Sonett III. The Sonett III was the last in Saab's Sonett sports car line, but it was the sleekest of them. This car just hits all the right notes on what a 70s sports car should look like. The base is that classic 70s fastback coupe design like the Datsun Zs, Opel GT, and RX-7, but done up with lots of extras going on. And the body is actually made of lightweight fiberglass rather than normal metal, so no rust to be seen. The body was not designed in-house, but actually over in Italy. It's got such a nice flowing curve from the front and bumping over the back wheel. There's a beautiful slope back with a pure glass cover, and the front end has such a clean and aggressive low-hanging grille with rounded lights. Despite having lights here, there are still even pop-up headlights too, so overkill in the best way, and you'll definitely be able to see at night. Even the way the headlights have that slope off on the ends is a nice touch too. And here is where things get interesting. The long and slim hood is complete with a little hump, but you also notice this square panel under it. This is the hood. That's it. Granted, when you pop it open, there's only a little V4 underneath, but with such a long front end, it's pretty strange this is all they give you to work with. But more on that in a bit. We gotta finish appreciating the styling. It's got one of those button door openers, and the interior is pretty basic and small, but that's pretty common on these sorts of cars from the era. Not a single pocket or place to put anything other than this tiny little glove box. I mean, cup holders weren't quite a thing yet. On the passenger side, it also has this little handle, which makes it feel like a little roller coaster. And of course, you have the name of the car right in the middle, because they knew people would be asking, what kind of Saab is that a lot? Overall, the interior is decent, if just a bit basic, but the brown trim is nice and the colors match well with the green paint on the body. Plus, that trunk is pretty darn clean. Oh, and the pop-up headlights are actually manual. Like, you literally have to pull a lever to pop them up rather than hit a button and a motor does it for you. Again, this is 1974, we're not in the futuristic 80s yet. It's actually really funny because it takes a surprising amount of force to get these things up. You really gotta yank it hard, and when you put them down, they kind of just fall and slam into place. It even shakes the whole hood every time like something's gonna break. And all right, now we can come back to where we left off under the hood. And it's not a really big car by any means. It's actually pretty narrow when you look at it. But again, they give the illusion of a long front to make it look like you got a decent sized engine under, but then they just give you this tiny panel of a hood with only a tiny V4. Like, it's not even an inline 4 that has to be longer. It's a V4, which takes up even less space. I mean, look, there's so little space, they even had to run the radiator cap up here, because how else would you reach it? But anyways, this is what you get. Luckily, when we got the car, everything worked except some electrical stuff like turn signals, which have been fixed, so we haven't had to work any tools into this tiny engine bay quite yet. And the engine is pretty weird on its own. It's actually a Ford engine, a Ford V4. I'm not sure if they just chopped their V8s in half and sold them to Saab or what. But either way, this is a 1700cc V4 that puts out a whopping 65 horsepower. A little disappointing for how aggressive the car looks, but you know, we'll just have to see how it pans out in the test drive later. And unfortunately, no, this is before Saab started putting turbos into their cars, so none of that to be seen here. One thing that does set this car apart from the lookalikes, like the Datsun Zs, Opel GT, Lombardi, we'll talk about this thing another day, and RX-7, is that the Sonnet 3 is front-wheel drive, which you wouldn't expect on a car like this from the 70s and with how it's styled. But let's not judge too quick and see what this 65 horsepower Swedish car, styled by Italians with an American branded motor, can really do. Okay, first thing you notice when inside it, this cockpit is low, like really low. The pedals are floor mounted too, so you feel like you are reaching your toes to push them down, especially the clutch. The windshield is short too, making things feel very cramped, but I wouldn't say it's in a bad way. It's more like you're just in a small race car. Now, one last thing I have to comment on before we can even get driving is this shifter. Lots of old shifters are designed much looser than modern ones, but this still is one of the strangest ones I've encountered. Now, it's not actually loose, it's actually pretty slow to move around, but what makes it really difficult to use is the fact that it's one of those shifters where to get to reverse, you have to go all the way to the left and then down. Now, fine enough, but the real problem is that there's no guard to prevent you from shifting into reverse while moving. That, coupled with the fact that second is weirdly close to reverse, makes it almost impossible for me to reliably hit second gear. Like, you pull back normally from first, and sometimes it catches the reverse rail because it really is right up against second. I always hesitate shifting because it seems like I always have a 50-50 chance of grinding reverse gear. My dad did daily drive this car for a bit and claims to have gotten used to it, but even he admits that he has to be really careful and occasionally hears that horrid grinding noise that makes any car guy cringe. Luckily, when we actually get moving, the car has a surprising amount of oomph to it. Like, I end up just skipping second gear a lot of the time and go straight to third with no problem as long as you ride first long enough. Like, I'm really surprised. It all feels really smooth to accelerate for such an old car, and that Ford V4 really gets going for only being 65 horsepower. Now, this is most likely due to the very aerodynamic shape of the car coupled with the fiberglass body. Really light and low air resistance. Now, would I say it's so fast that it justifies a roller coaster handlebar on the passenger side? No, it's not blazing down the road or anything, but it is a lot smoother than I expected, especially for an early 70s car. It's overall zippy and fun to get going. We do have a bit of a different story for turning, however. At higher speeds on bends, it's fine enough, but at corners you do have some front-wheel drive understeer, and you can't really downshift into second while turning since you risk grinding away your transmission in reverse. But still, overall, driving this car is a fun time, if a little bit of work. But it's work in a rewarding way rather than a chore. When sitting in it, you're surrounded by such an early 70s interior, and looking out that tiny windshield, you feel like you're in another time and you're driving some old race car. It's just so funny because the car is pretty quick to get up to speed, at least for what it is, but the thing that slows you down the most is that hesitation to find second gear. But I will admit I have gotten more used to finding it as I drove it. Even with driving aside, the Saab Sonnet III is easily one of the most stellar looking cars we have. It looks nothing like the cars I associate with Saab, and I had never even heard of it before it showed up here, but I'm still really glad it exists. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that already knew these existed and think I've been living under a rock, but still, I feel like this car is good proof that there are plenty of unique and cool classic cars out there that aren't the ones that people typically first think of, like Mustangs, Datsuns, MGs, and Porsches. And this car really is unique. fiberglass, Italian styling, Ford V4, and front-wheel drive in an early 70s sports car. When people unfamiliar with the car see it for the first time, I doubt anyone would ever first guess Saab. And that almost makes it cooler in itself. Thanks for watching. I know it's been a while since the first episode, but I spent a lot of time filming and I'm now getting around to editing, so I got a couple more videos coming soon. If you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon and Venmo down below, and if you're into working on cars, I now have a series where I'm restoring my new beater MR2. I'm trying to make it as nice as possible, but within a budget I can afford. Thanks again, and see you soon.